The diner was alive with the usual hum of clattering plates, sizzling grills, and the low murmur of conversations. It was a small, cozy place, the kind where regulars came for the comfort of familiar faces and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. In the corner booth, a man in his late 50s sat quietly, nursing a cup of black coffee. He looked like any other customer, dressed in a simple flannel shirt and jeans, his face partially hidden under a worn-out baseball cap. But this man was no ordinary patron. He was the owner of the diner, a successful CEO who had built a chain of restaurants across the country. Today, he was here undercover, wanting to see how his business operated on the ground level. As he sipped his coffee, his eyes scanned the room. The waitstaff moved efficiently, balancing trays and smiling at customers. But something caught his attention, a sound, faint but unmistakable. It was the sound of someone crying. The noise came from the kitchen, muffled by the swinging doors. He strained to listen, his curiosity piqued. The crying grew louder, more desperate, and then he heard a voice, trembling with emotion. "I just don't know how much longer I can do this," the voice said, choked with tears. The CEO froze. He wasn't supposed to interfere. This was supposed to be an observation, a way to understand his business better. But something about the raw pain in that voice tugged at him. He stood up, leaving his coffee untouched, and walked toward the kitchen. Pushing the door slightly ajar, he saw her, a waitress in her late 30s, her uniform slightly wrinkled, her face streaked with tears. She was sitting on a stool, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. A cook stood nearby, awkwardly patting her back, clearly unsure of what to do. "It's gonna be okay," the cook said, though his voice lacked conviction. The CEO's heart ached. He didn't know her story, but he could see the weight of the world on her shoulders. For a moment, he hesitated. Should he reveal himself? Should he step in? Before he could decide, the waitress wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and stood up. "I'm fine," she said, forcing a smile. "I just need to get back out there." She pushed through the kitchen doors, past the CEO, and back into the diner, her face now a mask of cheerful professionalism. The CEO watched her go, his mind racing. Who was she? What was she going through? And why did it feel like he had just witnessed something that would change everything? He returned to his booth, but his coffee had gone cold. The diner continued its usual rhythm, but for the CEO, nothing felt the same. He couldn't shake the image of the waitress crying, the sound of her voice echoing in his mind. He knew he couldn't just walk away. Something had to be done. The waitress moved through the diner with practiced ease, her smile bright and her voice warm as she took orders and delivered plates of food. To the customers, she was the picture of efficiency and cheerfulness. But beneath the surface, she was barely holding it together. Her name was Linda, though most people just called her Han or Sweetie, without ever asking. She had been working at the diner for nearly 5 years, and in that time, she had become a fixture, a reliable, hard-working presence who never complained. But life outside the diner was a different story. Linda was a single mother to a 7-year-old daughter named Mia. Mia had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease 2 years ago, and since then, life had been a relentless cycle of hospital visits, medications, and mounting bills. Linda worked double shifts whenever she could, but no matter how many hours she put in, it never seemed to be enough. The medical expenses were crushing, and the stress was taking its toll. That morning, before her shift, Linda had received another call from the hospital. Mia's latest round of treatments wasn't working as well as they had hoped, and the doctors wanted to try a new, more expensive medication. Linda had listened quietly, her heart sinking as the voice on the other end of the line explained the cost. She had thanked the nurse, hung up, and sat in her car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. She didn't know how she was going to afford it. She didn't know how much longer she could keep going. But she didn't have the luxury of falling apart. Mia needed her. So Linda had wiped her tears, fixed her makeup in the rearview mirror, and walked into the diner with her usual smile. She had made it through most of her shift without breaking down, but then it had hit her, the weight of it all, the fear, the exhaustion. She had slipped into the kitchen, thinking no one would notice, and let the tears come. Now, as she refilled coffee cups and cleared tables, Linda tried to push the thoughts away. She couldn't afford to dwell on her problems. She had a job to do, tips to earn, a daughter to take care of. But the CEO, still sitting in his corner booth, couldn't stop watching her. He noticed the way her hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee, the way her smile faltered for just a second before she caught herself. He saw the dark circles under her eyes, the weariness in her movements. When Linda approached his table to ask if he needed anything else, he hesitated. He wanted to say something, to ask if she was okay, but he knew he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he simply nodded and said, "Just the check, please." Linda handed him the bill with a polite smile. "Thank you. Have a great day." As she walked away, the CEO stared at the check, his mind racing. He didn't know her story, but he could see the struggle in her eyes. And he knew he couldn't just let it go. The CEO left the diner that day with a heavy heart. He drove back to his office in silence, the image of the waitress, Linda, lingering in his mind. Her tears, her forced smile, the way she carried herself despite the obvious weight on her shoulders, it all stayed with him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something profoundly important, something that went beyond the usual challenges of running a business. As he sat in his spacious office, surrounded by the trappings of success, polished furniture, awards on the shelves, a skyline view of the city, he found himself reflecting on his own journey. It hadn't been an easy road. He had started with nothing, just a small diner he had bought with every penny he could scrape together. Back then, he had known every employee by name. He had worked alongside them, sweating in the kitchen, serving customers, cleaning tables. He had understood their struggles, because they were his struggles too. But as the business grew, as the diners multiplied and the profits rolled in, he had become more removed from the day-to-day operations. He spent his time in boardrooms, making decisions that affected hundreds of employees he had never met. He told himself it was necessary, that it was the price of success. But now, sitting in his office, he wondered if he had lost something along the way. He thought about Linda. She was just one employee in a chain of hundreds, but her pain felt personal. It reminded him of his own mother, who had worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table when he was a child. He remembered the exhaustion on her face, the way she would collapse into a chair at the end of the day, too tired to even eat. He had vowed back then that if he ever made it, he would never forget where he came from. But had he? The CEO leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He realized that he didn't even know the names of most of his employees anymore. He didn't know their stories, their struggles, their dreams. He had built an empire, but at what cost? That evening, instead of heading home, he returned to the diner. He sat in the same corner booth, watching as Linda moved through her shift. He noticed how she went out of her way to make customers feel welcome, how she remembered their usual orders, how she laughed at their jokes even when she was clearly exhausted. She was more than just a waitress, she was the heart of the diner. And yet, she was struggling. The CEO's mind raced with questions. How many others like her were there in his company? How many employees were barely getting by, working long hours for low pay, carrying burdens he couldn't even imagine? He had always prided himself on being a good boss, on creating jobs and opportunities. But now, he wondered if he had been blind to the realities of his employees' lives. As he left the diner that night, he made a decision. He couldn't just sit back and do nothing. He needed to understand, to really see what was happening in his company. And he needed to make changes, not just for Linda, but for everyone who worked for him. The next morning, he called his assistant into his office. "Cancel my meetings for the next few days," he said. "I'm going undercover again." His assistant looked surprised, but didn't argue. "Where to this time?" "Everywhere," the CEO replied. "I need to see it all." The CEO's decision to go undercover wasn't just about observing his business, it was about understanding the people who kept it running. Over the next few days, he visited several of his diners, posing as a regular customer. He watched, listened, and took notes. But his mind kept returning to Linda. There was something about her story, or rather, the fragments of it he had glimpsed, that he couldn't let go of. One evening, after her shift ended, he decided to follow her. He told himself it wasn't to invade her privacy, but to understand her world. He parked his car a discreet distance away and watched as she walked to a bus stop, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She boarded the bus, and he followed in his car, keeping a safe distance. The bus ride took them to a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Linda got off at a stop near a small apartment complex. The CEO parked his car and watched as she walked up to a building, her steps slow but determined. He noticed a little girl waiting by the entrance, her face lighting up as she saw Linda. "Mommy," the girl called out, running toward her. Linda knelt down, catching her daughter in a tight hug. "Hey, sweetheart. How was your day?" The CEO's heart ached as he watched the scene. The little girl, Mia, was clearly Linda's world. But even from a distance, he could see the signs of illness in the child. She was thin, her face pale, and she moved with a fragility that spoke of her condition. Linda took Mia's hand, and they walked into the building together. The CEO sat in his car for a long time, his mind racing. He thought about the sacrifices Linda must be making, the sleepless nights, the constant worry. He thought about the unfairness of it all, how someone who worked so hard, who gave so much, could still be struggling so deeply. The next day, he returned to the diner, this time with a plan. He struck up a conversation with one of the cooks, a friendly man who had worked there for years. "That waitress, Linda," the CEO said casually. "She seems like a hard worker." The cook nodded. "Yeah, she's one of the best. Always here, always smiling. But man, she's got it rough." "How so?" the CEO asked, trying to sound casual. The cook hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "She's a single mom. Her kid's sick, real sick. Linda's always working, trying to pay the bills, but it's never enough. I've seen her crying in the kitchen more times than I can count. Breaks my heart, you know?" The team reluctantly agreed, and the CEO set the wheels in motion. But he knew that wasn't enough. He wanted to help Linda directly, but he didn't want to embarrass her or make her feel like a charity case. He decided to start small. The next day, he returned to the diner, this time with a simple plan. He sat in his usual corner booth and waited for Linda to approach his table. When she did, he handed her a generous tip, far more than usual, along with a note. "Thank you for your hard work," the note read. "You're making a difference every day." Linda looked at the tip, then at the note, her eyes widening in surprise. This is too much," she stammered. The CEO shook his head. "It's not. You deserve it." Linda hesitated, then nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you," she whispered before hurrying away. Over the next few weeks, the CEO continued to visit the diner, always leaving a generous tip and a kind note. He also began anonymously paying for Mia's medical treatments, working through a charity to ensure Linda wouldn't know the source of the funds. He watched as some of the weight seemed to lift from Linda's shoulders, as her smile became a little brighter, her steps a little lighter. But he knew this was only the beginning. The changes he was implementing company-wide would take time to roll out, and he wanted to do more for Linda. He decided it was time to reveal his true identity, not as a grand gesture, but as a way to show her that she wasn't alone. One evening, after the diner had closed, he asked Linda to stay behind. She looked nervous, unsure of what to expect. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. The CEO took a deep breath. "Everything's fine. I just wanted to talk to you." He led her to a quiet corner of the diner and sat down. "Linda," he began, "I haven't been entirely honest with you. I'm not just a customer. I'm the owner of this diner, and all the others in the chain." Linda's eyes widened in shock. "What? But, why?" "I wanted to see how things were really going," he explained. "And I wanted to understand the challenges my employees face." You've shown me so much, Linda. Your strength, your dedication, it's inspired me to make changes, not just for you, but for everyone who works here. Linda stared at him, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, the CEO replied gently. Just know that you're not alone anymore. We're going to help you, and your daughter. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself. For the first time in a long time, Linda allowed herself to hope. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure, her life was about to change. Linda sat across from the CEO, her hands trembling as she clutched a napkin. The diner was quiet now, the usual hustle and bustle replaced by an eerie stillness. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a pale glow over the worn vinyl booths and checkered floors. Her mind raced, trying to process what she had just heard. The man sitting across from her, the one who had been quietly observing her for weeks, leaving generous tips and kind notes, wasn't just a kind stranger. He was the owner of the diner. Her boss. I don't understand, Linda stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you do this? Why would you pretend to be someone else? The CEO leaned forward, his expression earnest. I didn't mean to deceive you, Linda. I just wanted to see things as they really are. I've been so removed from the day-to-day operations of my business for so long that I forgot what it's like to be on the front lines. I forgot about the people who make this company what it is, people like you. Linda looked down at her hands, her mind swirling with emotions. She felt exposed, as if her struggles had been laid bare for him to see. But there was also a flicker of relief, a sense that maybe, just maybe, things were about to get better. I've seen how hard you work, the CEO continued. I've seen the sacrifices you make, the love you have for your daughter. And I want you to know that you're not alone anymore. We're going to help you, Linda. Not just with words, but with action. Linda's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. It's too much. It's not too much, the CEO said firmly. You deserve this. You deserve to have some peace of mind, to know that you don't have to carry this burden by yourself. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table to her. This is my personal number. If you ever need anything at all, you call me. No red tape, no bureaucracy. Just me. Linda stared at the card, her fingers brushing against it as if it were made of gold. She had spent so long feeling invisible, like just another face in the crowd. But now, for the first time in years, she felt seen. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know how to thank you. The CEO smiled gently. You don't have to thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing. You're an inspiration, Linda. Not just to me, but to everyone who knows you. As Linda left the diner that night, she felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, gratitude, and a glimmer of hope. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could face it. The next few days were a whirlwind. The CEO wasted no time in implementing the changes he had promised. He held a company-wide meeting, announcing the new policies to a room full of stunned employees. Wages would be increased, healthcare benefits would be provided, and a fund would be established to support employees in crisis. The room erupted in applause, but the CEO wasn't done. These changes are just the beginning, he said. We're going to create a company that values its people, that supports them not just as employees, but as human beings. Because that's what you are, human beings with lives, families, and dreams. And it's my job to make sure you have the tools and support you need to thrive. Linda sat in the back of the room, her heart swelling with pride. She had never felt so valued, so appreciated. And when the CEO announced the creation of a foundation to support the children of employees, with Mia as the first beneficiary, she couldn't hold back her tears. After the meeting, the CEO approached her. How are you feeling? He asked. Linda smiled through her tears. I feel hopeful. For the first time in a long time, I feel like things are going to be okay. The CEO nodded. They are, Linda. They really are. The announcement of the new policies sent ripples through the company. Employees who had once felt invisible and undervalued now walked with a renewed sense of purpose. The diner where Linda worked became a hub of excitement and hope, as staff members shared stories of how the changes would impact their lives. For Linda, the shift was profound. The weight that had pressed down on her for so long began to lift, replaced by a cautious optimism. The first change she noticed was her paycheck. The increase in wages wasn't life-changing, but it was enough to ease some of the financial strain. She could finally afford to buy groceries without worrying about whether she'd have enough left over for Mia's medications. The healthcare benefits were another game-changer. For the first time in years, Linda didn't have to choose between paying bills and taking Mia to the doctor. But it wasn't just the financial support that made a difference. The CEO's decision to implement flexible scheduling allowed Linda to adjust her shifts so she could spend more time with Mia. She no longer had to rush from work to pick her daughter up from school or miss important doctor's appointments. For the first time in a long time, Linda felt like she could breathe. The diner itself began to change too. The staff, once weary and overworked, now seemed energized. The cook who had comforted Linda in the kitchen started joking around again, his laughter filling the space. The other waitresses, who had once been too tired to chat, now shared stories and supported each other. The atmosphere was lighter, happier, and it showed in the way they interacted with customers. One afternoon, as Linda was refilling coffee cups, a regular customer stopped her. "You seem different," he said with a smile. "Happier. Did something good happen?" Linda grinned. "You could say that. Things are just better." The CEO continued to visit the diner, though now he no longer hid his identity. He would sit in his usual corner booth, watching as the staff went about their work with a renewed sense of pride. He often struck up conversations with employees, asking about their lives and listening to their stories. It was clear that he was committed to staying connected, to understanding the people who made his business successful. One day, he called Linda over to his table. "How are things?" he asked. Linda hesitated, then smiled. "Better. Much better. Mia's treatments are going well, and I finally feel like I can focus on her without worrying about everything else." "Thank you, for everything." The CEO nodded. "I'm glad to hear that. But this isn't just about you, Linda. It's about all of us. We're a team, and we're stronger when we support each other." Linda felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so long feeling like she was on her own, like she had to carry the weight of the world by herself. But now, for the first time, she felt like she was part of something bigger. The changes at the diner didn't go unnoticed. Customers began to comment on the positive atmosphere, and word spread quickly. The diner became a popular spot, not just for its food, but for its welcoming environment. People came not just to eat, but to be part of the community that had formed there. Linda found herself becoming a leader among the staff. Her resilience and dedication inspired her coworkers, and they often turned to her for advice or support. She started organizing small gatherings after work, potlucks, game nights, and other events that brought everyone together. It was her way of giving back, of creating the kind of support system she had always wished for. One evening, as the staff gathered in the diner after closing, the CEO stopped by. He stood at the front of the room, looking out at the faces of the people who had become like family to him. "I want to thank you all," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You've shown me what it means to be a team, to support each other through thick and thin. This diner, this company, it's not just a business. It's a family. And I'm proud to be part of it." The room erupted in applause, and Linda felt tears welling up in her eyes. She looked around at her coworkers, at the people who had become her friends, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. With the support of the CEO and the changes he had implemented, Linda's life began to transform in ways she had never imagined. The financial stability allowed her to focus on Mia's health without the constant fear of bills piling up. The flexible schedule gave her the time she needed to be present for her daughter, whether it was attending doctor's appointments, helping with homework, or simply sharing quiet moments together. But it wasn't just the practical changes that made a difference. For the first time in years, Linda felt valued, not just as an employee, but as a person. The CEO's kindness and the support of her coworkers gave her a sense of belonging she hadn't felt since before Mia's diagnosis. She began to dream again, to think about the future in a way she hadn't allowed herself to in a long time. One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table with Mia, she found herself flipping through an old notebook. It was filled with sketches and ideas she had jotted down over the years, designs for clothing, home decor, and even a few business plans. She had always loved creating, but life had gotten in the way. Now, as she looked at the pages, she felt a spark of inspiration. "What's that, Mommy?" Mia asked, peering over her shoulder. Linda smiled. "Just some old ideas I had. I used to dream about starting my own business someday." Mia's eyes lit up. "You should do it. You're the best at drawing, Mommy." Linda laughed, ruffling her daughter's hair. "Maybe someday, sweetheart." But the idea stayed with her. Over the next few weeks, she began to sketch again, filling the notebook with new designs. She shared her ideas with her coworkers, who encouraged her to pursue her passion. Even the CEO took an interest, offering advice and resources to help her get started. "You have a gift, Linda," he told her one day. "Don't let it go to waste." With his encouragement, Linda began to take small steps toward her dream. She started by creating a few pieces of clothing for Mia, using fabric she found at a local thrift store. The designs were simple but elegant, and Mia loved them. Soon, other parents at Mia's school began to notice, asking where they could buy similar items. Linda's confidence grew with each positive comment. She started an online store, selling her designs to a small but growing customer base. It wasn't much at first, but it was a start. And for the first time in years, Linda felt like she was moving forward, not just surviving. The diner continued to thrive under the CEO's leadership. The changes he had implemented had created a positive ripple effect, not just for the employees, but for the business as a whole. Customers flocked to the diner, drawn by the warm atmosphere and the sense of community. Linda's story became a source of inspiration for her coworkers. They saw how she had turned her struggles into strength, how she had found hope and purpose even in the darkest times. She became a mentor to new employees, offering advice and support to those who were facing their own challenges. One day, the CEO approached her with an idea. "I've been thinking," he said. "We should share your story, not just within the company, but with the world. You're an inspiration, Linda, and your journey could help so many people." Linda hesitated. "I don't know. I'm not sure I'm ready for that." The CEO nodded. "I understand. But think about it. Your story could give hope to others who are struggling. It could show them that no matter how hard things get, there's always a way forward." Linda thought about his words for a long time. She thought about the nights she had spent crying in the kitchen, the days she had felt like giving up. And she thought about how far she had come, how much her life had changed. Finally, she agreed. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." The CEO arranged for Linda to share her story at a company event. She stood on stage, looking out at a sea of faces, her heart pounding. But as she began to speak, the words flowed naturally. She talked about her struggles, her fears, and her journey to finding hope. She talked about the support she had received from her coworkers and the CEO, and how it had changed her life. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. People came up to her afterward, tears in their eyes, thanking her for her courage and honesty. Linda realized that her story wasn't just about her, it was about all the people who had supported her along the way. As she left the event that night, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had come so far, but she knew her journey wasn't over. There were still challenges ahead, but for the first time, she felt ready to face them. The CEO stood at the front of the room, looking out at the sea of faces before him. It was the annual company meeting, and this year, it felt different. The room was filled with energy, with hope, with a sense of unity that had been missing for far too long. Employees from all levels of the company were there, from the newest hires to the most seasoned managers. And sitting in the front row was Linda, her daughter Mia by her side. The CEO cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. A little over a year ago, he began, I walked into one of our diners as a customer. I didn't know what to expect, but what I found changed everything. I met someone who showed me what true strength looks like. Someone who reminded me why we do what we do. He glanced at Linda, who smiled nervously. Linda's story isn't just about struggle. It's about resilience, about hope, and about the power of community. She showed me that success isn't measured by profits or growth, but by the lives we touch and the difference we make. The room erupted in applause, and Linda felt tears welling up in her eyes. She squeezed Mia's hand, her heart swelling with pride. The CEO continued, his voice steady and strong. When I started this company, I had a vision. I wanted to create a place where people could come together, where they could feel at home. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that vision. I got caught up in the numbers, in the bottom line, and I forgot about the people who make this company what it is. He paused, looking out at the crowd. But Linda reminded me. She reminded me that every person in this room has a story, a dream, a struggle. And it's our job, my job, to support them, to lift them up, and to help them succeed. The room was silent now, every eye fixed on the CEO. The changes we've made over the past year. The higher wages, the healthcare benefits, the support programs, they're just the beginning. We're building a company that values its people, that sees them not just as employees, but as human beings. And that's what true success looks like. He turned to Linda, his eyes filled with gratitude. Linda, you've inspired me in ways I can't even put into words. You've shown me what it means to lead with compassion, to fight for what's right, and to never give up. Thank you. The room erupted in applause once more, and Linda stood, her cheeks flushed with emotion. She walked up to the stage, her heart pounding, and stood beside the CEO. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling. Thank you for seeing me, for believing in me, and for giving me a chance. But this isn't just my story. It's all of ours. We're a family, and together, we can do anything. The crowd rose to their feet, their applause deafening. Linda looked out at the sea of faces, her heart filled with gratitude and hope. She had come so far, but she knew her journey wasn't over. There were still challenges ahead, but for the first time, she felt ready to face them. As the meeting came to an end, the CEO approached Linda. I have one more surprise for you, he said with a smile. Linda raised an eyebrow. What is it? He handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter, offering her a position as the company's new director of employee well-being. The role would allow her to advocate for employees, to create programs and initiatives that would support them in their personal and professional lives. Linda stared at the letter, her hands trembling. I don't know what to say. The CEO smiled. Say yes. You've earned this, Linda. And I can't think of anyone better for the job. Linda nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes. Yes, I'll do it. The story of the Undercover CEO and the waitress who inspired him spread far and wide. It became a symbol of hope, of resilience, and of the power of compassion. Linda's journey reminded people that no matter how hard life gets, there's always a way forward. And the CEO's transformation showed that true success isn't about wealth or power, but about the lives we touch and the difference we make. As Linda stood on the stage that day, with Mia by her side and the CEO at her back, she realized that her story was just beginning. And she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with courage, with hope, and with the knowledge that she was never alone. The end.